welcome back. Let's take a look at some of those responses to our question of the day. Adil and Chabeleng is there. We can see him. We're just fixing the last bit of connection there to that feed. But let's take a look at some of the responses to this question of the day.
All right, so it's basically just your views on the president's plan to deal with the country's energy crisis. Here we go. So this is the first tweet coming in from Shorty saying, "Morning, ladies. Finally, President addressed the nation on the energy crisis. Long overdue. I support a plan to rope in former Eskom skilled personnel to come on board to assist the power utility."
Pule says, "Good morning, ladies. Kinan Lian, not to sound negative or what, but this problem at Eskom is not something that will be solved in 10 years' time. Get rid of the corrupt ANC and officials and people at Eskom, and then I will say I see the future."
Abel saying, "Good morning. The plan sounds good, and I believe it'll work if the people who are given the job, they execute it accordingly."
This one's from Evelyn. It says, "Avasheni ladies, it's the right thing, even though it took long. I hope it is not just a song. He must mean it."
Nazim, good morning, beautiful ladies. In the process of announcing these measures, the president should have announced the removal of Pravin Gordhan, Andre de Ruyter, and Gwede, the Tiger Mantashe, because they are the biggest part of the problem at Eskom.
Edwin, President have a long mouth to speak nice, but implementation, dololo, and looting money is their pride.
Zwandile saying, "Morning, as long as it's going to stabilize the grid from blackouts and also deal with criminality that led to these blackouts, some of us have no problem. Our problem or crime is having stable electricity while others are enriching themselves at the country's expense."
Right, thanks so much for those responses. Please keep them coming at Morning Live SABC. So staying with this theme, President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced a range of measures to fix the country's struggling power utility. Now, Eskom is trying to stave off further high levels of rolling blackouts. Ramaphosa was addressing the nation last night on the energy crisis the country has been experiencing, and he has, however, rejected calls from some political leaders for a state of emergency to be declared around the energy sector. South Africans recently endured stage 6 rolling blackouts amid an unprotected strike by Eskom workers. And the president says that he has consulted with experts, business, civil society and political parties on this crisis. Meanwhile, the recent adoption of the Just Transition Framework and the $8.5 billion investment pledged by the Western countries is geared towards transitioning South Africa from coal-fired plants towards developing green alternatives. Now, energy analyst Adil and Chabeleng joins us now for more on these developments. Adil, thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you so much and good morning.
So first off, some of your takeaways from the president's speech last night and, of course, your views on what was said.
I thought the speech was quite impressive in terms of, talking about the fact that we're coming out of a COVID-19 situation. The economy is depressed, and there was something that I think people wanted to hear that was positive. The fact that huge concessions were given whereby electricity now can be sold by malls, can be sold by mines, can be sold by factories, and anyone else who wants to generate electricity can produce and be able to sell. The issue is we are going to have to see how practical all of these measures are. Lovely speech, incredible, promises made. But as you know that in South Africa, a lot of these things are promised, but when it comes to implementation, there's always a lack of implementation. So it's not the first time. We're always hoping that whenever these speeches are made, something concrete will come out of it. I mean, we're still struggling with the fact that Eskom itself was not put as a priority on the plan, which said that at least they will recover a minimum of 5 to 10 or 15,000 megawatts so that the whole load shedding situation can stop. All you need in South Africa is 6,000 megawatts to make sure that you never reach stage 6 load shedding level. All that's required in the system. And if priority was placed on that and then introducing, new technologies, new solutions, ensuring that there is a market which is liberalized in this case, whereby now everybody else can produce electricity and sell it directly to Eskom and have all forms of means of actually selling agreements created. So we hope that will create a difference in the market. But the most important thing in South Africa needed is base load electricity, which means power stations based on coal or nuclear to be functional and to be working 365 days a year, as well as 7 days a week, and making sure that they are functional and available at all times.
So it all sounds great, as you say, Adil, but let's look at the practicality and some of the information gaps here. So if everybody is able to sell to Eskom whatever surplus electricity they may have, at what cost? How do we regulate how much we pay as Eskom to purchase whatever is being sold by whoever has surplus electricity? How is that going to work?
At this stage, there was not much. Remember, the plan was just really a scathing of showing off in terms of describing what is going to be possibly done in the market. Right now, there is no regulatory framework that says that people can sell, apart from the fact that you enter into a PPA, which is a power purchase agreement with Eskom, and you are then able to sell directly to Eskom. Right now, as we're speaking, the plan has no details on how the feasibility of any of these projects is going to be achieved. The only detail that was actually discussed was the fact that they're doing away with the 100 megawatts embedded generation, small generation, which was actually given no licensing framework. So that whole environment of the 100 megawatts is falling away. You no longer have any more limitations on how much megawatts you can produce as an independent producer. All you need to do is just to notify, the government in terms of the department, as well as NERSA, to actually register you as one of the producers, and you are able to produce as much as electricity as you want. The practicality of it is going to come when we see the implementation of any of these programs and plans. This is where the mines probably will be able to sell to Eskom, the shopping complexes, as well as the factories that will be producing their own electricity in excess, and whatever excess they have, they can actually offload off to Eskom. So the pricing mechanism is not in place as yet. Even the framework to ensure that people can actually start generating and selling back, including the small modular producers at the home, where you're having your solar or you're having your excess, electricity stored on your battery, and you want to actually sell it back to the grid. That whole system doesn't exist at this stage. And I think that is a framework that is going to be developed in the coming few months.
Adil, we're running out of time. Unfortunately, came to the interview late, but just with regard to Eskom, of course, and the billions that Eskom owes, what does this mean for Eskom, more broadly speaking, if then, for example, the municipalities who owe Eskom, if they are able to procure elsewhere, where does all of this leave Eskom? And it's not just the municipalities, but just more broadly speaking around what was announced last night.
Eskom is going to suffer in the sense that the more there's going to be all other generators, they will lose a lot of sales on their side, which means that Eskom is no longer going to be focused on literally producing and selling electricity. They will focus on ensuring that they can collect as much electricity as available in the market and become a market, player in a sense of selling all the other electricity produced by all other players. So it's going to affect its revenues. It's going to affect its ability to perform in the market. And that is why probably there was a suggestion that there must be a second Eskom, which will then help in this case in order to ensure that there will be relief on what Eskom is going to lose. Remember, the president spoke about unbundling finalization to happen by the end of this year, which will break up Eskom into various divisions. So there's going to be a bit of a huge hemorrhaging, which is making losses on Eskom side, because buying all of this power with what revenue available and how are they going to regulate the market is going to cause a whole lot of other changes in the marketplace, and there will be price increases for a lot of consumers. All of us are going to have to start facing the reality that the energy market is liberalized and prices are going to increase.
Finally, Adil, perhaps very briefly for us. So moving forward, as we sit here today, wondering about what's going to happen, does this mean the end of load shedding anytime soon?
No, not at all. Load shedding is not going to end in the next 2 years minimum, even if some of these technologies are brought into space. The only thing that will happen to end load shedding is for Eskom to bring back its actually units and power units that are currently off the grid right now, which is over 17,000 megawatts of units that are currently unfunctional. So if Eskom restores all of that, load shedding will end, within 6 months to 18 months. But because the focus is not on Eskom's current power base as well as generation, there's not going to be a load shedding ending. We're still going to see a lot of load shedding until people are literally, in an independent space where they can produce their own electricity. But for now, I don't see any end of load shedding.
President Cyril Ramaphosa announcing a range of measures to fix the country's struggling power utility, Eskom, and to stave off further high levels of rolling blackouts. So we are in conversation with energy expert Adil Nchabeleng. And Adil, thanks so much for staying with us. I thought we would squeeze it in, but there's just so much more that I actually want to touch on with you because it's a lot in terms of what has been announced. You look at some of the arrangements that will now fall away, like the licensing requirements. And one has to ask the question whether this was actually necessary. If, as the president announced now, that we will be procuring energy surplus from those entities within the country that have it, as well as purchasing from some of our neighboring and other SADC members, why didn't we do that previously? Why did it have to come to the sort of crisis that we are facing at the moment?
In terms of the decision making, it's always a government's prerogative. I mean, they sat with some of these, prerogatives in terms of finalizing. Remember, we have something called the IRP, Integrated Resource Plan, which stated very clearly what should have been done in the energy planning market and space with regards to what projects should be prioritized in terms of implementation. But nothing was actually followed up as such. So, I think it had to take a bit of a crisis for the president to face his, current saga and situation with the Pala and all other issues, and for something drastic to happen. And probably this is the reason, in order for President Cyril Ramaphosa to keep his presidency, he has to do something in the marketplace, and he has to do something to please the current, demands that are coming out of the economy that says that electricity crisis is actually completely collapsing the economy of South Africa. And as a result, something drastic needed to be done, in terms of liberalizing the energy production and generation and distribution market. And this is what has just happened in this case. Probably it needed a crisis of some sort to happen, but in case of, how politicians work, they always work in a crisis situation.
So is this crisis real or is it manufactured?
With regards to energy, part of it is actually partly, manufactured because, looking at what Eskom is capable of generating, it's got over 17,000 of unavailable, breakdowns, which means that some of them are not fixed on time, or some of them are not brought back into line, and some of them are not even properly maintained for a reason, probably. Either we could assume in this case, there are issues that are affecting Eskom with regards to sabotage on various levels. People are stealing a lot of diesel in Eskom. People are stealing a lot of coal. You have people at power stations that are just stripping some of these plants in terms of causing problems at power stations. So, there is a level of intervention that is happening, which is not at management level or executives, but it's happening at the sites where some of this electricity is produced. But in terms of really looking at the horizon, this is unnecessary for South Africa. We have far much more enough electricity available in the production grid. But the availability of it in terms of generation is another question. And this is where we have failed as a country to ensure that we can produce the basic electricity. Load shedding stage 4 and 6 produces over 10 hours of no electricity in a day. It's not a small thing as we actually experience it. It holds up the whole economy. People are unable to move, people are unable to produce. And now that everybody's working almost from home at various levels, it's becoming difficult for anybody else to become literally functional in an economy like this where you depend on electricity for everything that you do.
So, and I asked this question about a manufactured crisis because if you look at what is happening, and I'm just thinking now, are power stations not national key points? Because if they...
Yeah, power stations are national key points, and they're supposed to be guarded as such and actually be managed as such. But we have seen in the past whereby some of the power stations were actually vandalized. There was issues of break-ins and actually breaking downs of power cables and everything. And some of them have just bent down as units, in a various levels. So the key point question, it's neither here or there because that hasn't helped us in anything. These power stations are continuously tripping on some of the issues which are related to lack of either security or management or presence of proper visible security that actually ensures. So for me, if it was a key point and was managed from a key point of view, you would have had military presence as well as strong police presence in some of these power stations. So far, that is not the case, in most of the power stations with regards to their management. So yes, the key point concept of it exists, but probably on paper.
So, and it gets back to my question about a manufactured crisis, because you fail to do the basics in terms of enforcing the National Key Points Act, making sure that you look after these institutions. You fail to do the basics in terms of maintenance. So you have these units breaking down. Even with brand new builds, you have them actually breaking down. So it's not difficult to start seeing why conspiracy theories would arise. But given that, you spoke about the diesel, for example, the coal. I had an interview with Gayton McKenzie yesterday, and he speaks of the mafia that are operating at Eskom. I don't know about it, but he mentions it. He speaks about it. And of course, the unbundling of Eskom. Is that not what all of this was ultimately about? That you would unbundle it so that you could liberalize things the way they are being done now. But it just seems as though everything is accelerated at the moment.
Look, definitely there are vulture interests that are looking at Eskom's, being unbundled for various reasons, and especially introducing independent power producers that are going to be the substitute to Eskom's capacity to generate electricity. Most definitely that exists currently, but in terms of the direct, I've got no knowledge of any direct mafia operation that is operating within Eskom. I know that there are individuals that were actually caught in syndicates that were involved, but that doesn't really conclude much of what is currently said. What is being done deliberately is there's been a neglect of maintenance. There's been a total neglect of budgeting to put in resources, money particularly, and people that are required to manage this power station. Some of these power stations are operating at levels of 35% with regards to its efficiency, energy availability factor. Some of them don't even have enough resources to actually carry out their own maintenance. There's no components, there's no technology available, there's no support from executive management at headquarters. So if there is any level of direct sabotage, then it will come on the basis that there is a huge element of negligence, directly so to make sure that some of these power stations don't work. But again, there is an entire move which has not been spoken about, whereby these power stations are being shut down on the claims that they are old. Remember, when we talk about the age of a power station, age means nothing in a power station, because most of these power stations over a period of 7 to 15 years are renewed in terms of components whenever they are being fixed, maintained, as well as refurbished. So it can have a 35-year, 50-year, most of these power stations, some of them are 85-year-old and some are 100 years old. So the age is not the key factor in this case of aging power stations. The problem is the maintenance, as well as the upkeep of these power stations in order to generate electricity at higher required levels of above 70 to 80 and 85 energy availability factor, which is not happening. Eskom is dipped below 60 right now as we're speaking, and its inability to produce that electricity has caused us to be in this load shedding situation. And probably it was done deliberately in order to, open up the floodgates for all other sorts of producers to come into the market. But in terms of direct mafia operating, I really have no idea of that.
And just finally, Adil, with regard to a just energy transition, and this was something that we've been hearing about, there's been lots of talk about, and making sure that there is some sort of level-headed transition. How does this factor into that particular paradigm?
On the just energy transition, South Africa has signed up to the COP26 now, which has actually, ensured that South Africa must move away from coal. The implementation of the just energy transition, for me, in my view, is going to be disastrous because South Africa is a coal-based, economy, and moving away from coal is going to cause us a whole lot of problems. The unfortunate situation is we are experimenting with technologies that have never been proven. Just energy transition, yes, moving away from emission, ensuring that our power plants are actually, efficient in terms of their emission, controls, and ensuring that we can make sure we minimize a lot of CO2, which is carbon dioxide coming out of the power plants. That is something that should have been done already, because in our integrated resource plan, it states very clearly that Eskom should have transitioned its own power plants into high energy, high efficiency, low emissions situation is called technology. That technology has not been implemented. That reduces the emissions coming out of coal and reduces the current, environmental effects that happens. So we talk about just transition, but we're not really looking at the the effects it's going to have on the economy. When you move away from coal, you're shutting down an entire economy. And the worst part of it is the moving away from coal. We are only talking about Eskom's producing electricity out of coal. Nobody's talking about the importation of all of this coal leaving South Africa, going to all other destinations. But we're only talking about shutting down electricity production, which doesn't make sense in my case. Most countries, even including Germany and Europe, are all going back to the production of coal. They are rebuilding new coal power stations after the Ukraine-Russian war. And now they are back into the market of coal. Yet South Africa is pressed down to make sure that it doesn't develop. Remember, the minute you move into all other alternative technologies, you're no longer going to have industrial grade, you're no longer going to have mega factory grade electricity that is going to be produced. Everything is going to be microgrid, small and miniature, and it's going to be heavily managed in terms of who uses what electricity at what level, which means your industrial scale production as well as economic growth is going to be hampered, and there's going to be less and less electricity available. So just transition on emissions is wonderful, but with regards to economy, it's going to be a disaster.
Adil Nchabeleng, thanks so much for your time this morning. Of course, so much more to discuss, but hopefully we'll have more opportunity at another stage. Adil Nchabeleng, energy expert, discussing Eskom, South Africa's energy problem, and of course, the desperate situation that the country finds itself in, and the president's announcement last night to see if we can find a solution to this crisis. All right, we're going to take a quick break.